A group of doctors are paid millions to keep a billionaire's son deaf. The one person who exposes them? The new maid. And she's just been handcuffed by the very man she was trying to save. Welcome to Blissful Whispers. We are so happy you're here with us. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. And if you're ready for this story, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The Prescott estate wasn't just quiet, it was silenced. It was a fortress of modern glass and old money, a place where even the air seemed filtered, where sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows but felt too sterile to be warm. In the grand entryway, a single priceless vase sat on a pedestal, aligned with the geometric precision of a blueprint. There was no music, no idle chatter. The only sounds were the distant, high-tech hum of an industrial-grade ventilation system and the muffled, respectful click of shoe leather on stone. This was the mausoleum Warren Prescott had built, and he ruled it absolutely. From his penthouse study, Warren watched the groundskeepers trimming the hedges into perfect, unforgiving lines. He was a man whose face looked carved from the same cold, expensive granite as his countertops. His grief was a private, sharp-edged thing, and he had buried it under a suffocating avalanche of order. He adjusted a picture frame on his desk, a photo of a smiling woman who was no longer there, moving it a fraction of an inch to the left so it aligned perfectly with the edge of his leather desk blotter. Order was his religion. Control was his prayer. Because 10 floors below, in the West Wing, was the one thing in his multi-billion-dollar empire he could not control, the one failure that mocked his power every single day: his son. Alia felt the silence like a physical weight pressing on her chest. It was her first day. Clutching her thin coat, she followed the man who had introduced himself as Mr. Finch. The house was magnificent, but it felt empty, like a museum after hours. She was here for one reason: the stack of medical bills on her kitchen table, bills that had piled up since her mother's last hospital stay. But this house, with its enforced, unnatural hush, pricked at a specific, unhealed wound. She remembered another silence. A smaller, more desperate one. She remembered her little brother, Darius, sitting on the steps of their apartment, his hands trying to form words he'd forgotten the sound of. She remembered the helpless look in her mother's eyes when the doctors shook their heads, their voices full of pity and price tags they couldn't afford. Darius had faded in that silence, and Alia had sworn to God, never again. Never again would she just stand by and watch someone be erased. Your duties are outlined on this tablet. Mr. Finch, the head butler, stopped in the center of the hall. He was a tall, thin man who looked as if he'd been born in his severe black suit. His voice didn't just lack warmth, it seemed to actively absorb it from the air around him. You are to complete your checklist by 5 p.m. No unscheduled breaks. No personal items in public-facing rooms. All communication is to be routed through me. And he paused, fixing her with a look of cold, managerial authority. We are a quiet household, Miss Alia. We value discretion. Unnecessary noise is discouraged. He meant it. The silence was a rule. Finch turned and began to walk, his footsteps a quiet, metronomic click, click, click. The West Wing is off limits, as is the master study. Your primary areas will be the grand hall, the dining room, and the kitchens. As he spoke, Alia's attention was snagged. She saw him. A small boy, maybe 10, was sitting on the bottom step of the massive, curving staircase. He was arranging small silver toy cars in a perfectly straight line, his movements precise and automatic. His hair was perfectly combed, his expensive clothes impossibly neat. He didn't make a sound. As Finch droned on about the proper care for the Italian marble, 2 other maids in crisp uniforms walked through the hall, their arms full of linens. They didn't just ignore the boy, they detoured their path significantly, walking in a wide arc around the stairs as if he were a piece of fine art roped off from the public. They didn't look at him. They didn't acknowledge him. He was a fixture. A silent, sad part of the decor. Finch kept walking, expecting Alia to be right behind him. But she had stopped. Her feet felt rooted to the cold floor. She saw Darius. She saw the same profound, crushing loneliness she remembered from her brother's eyes. The boy Leo must have sensed her gaze. He looked up, his movements freezing. His eyes met hers. He flinched, his body tensing, clearly expecting her to look away, to dismiss him just like everyone else. Alia didn't. She couldn't. Her heart ached. She gave him a small, hesitant smile. It It was a tiny thing, barely a twitch of her lips, but in that vast, cold hall, it felt like lighting a match. The boy's eyes widened. He didn't smile back. He didn't move. But he didn't look away either. "Miss?" Finch's voice sliced through the moment, sharp and cold. "Is there a problem?" Alia tore her gaze away from the boy, her heart hammering. "No, sir. No problem." She hurried to catch up, the image of the boy's wide, startled eyes seared into her mind. If you believe every person deserves to be seen, hit that like button. Only cold-hearted people like Mr. Finch would just walk by and pretend he doesn't exist. Let's show the world we don't ignore people. The silence of the Prescott estate had its own rules. Alia had learned them quickly. You didn't hum. You didn't let a bucket clang. You wore soft-soled shoes. Mr. Finch's clipped tones from the day before echoed in her head. Unnecessary noise is discouraged. But Alia was discovering that there were different kinds of silence. There was the heavy, oppressive silence of the mansion. And then there was the brittle, lonely silence of the boy. She saw him again in the exact same spot on the bottom stair, his silver cars lined up with geometric, almost desperate precision. He was staring at the floor, his small shoulders slumped. He looked like a perfect porcelain doll left on a shelf, and the sight of him cracked something open in Alia's chest. She thought of Darius. She thought of the paper cranes she used to fold for him, how his eyes would light up, how he'd set them on his windowsill, a flock of silent birds in their tiny apartment. Her hand drifted to the pocket of her apron, where she kept a small, worn notepad. It was a risk. Finch's footsteps were a constant, patrolling presence in the house. This wasn't just unnecessary noise, it was an unscheduled interaction. It was a breach of protocol. She tore a small page from the notepad. Her hands, calloused from work, moved with a familiar, practiced grace. A fold here. A crease there. She was quick. In 30 seconds, a small white paper crane sat in her palm. She polished her way down the banister, her heart thumping against her ribs. She glanced left, then right. The hall was empty. Finch was nowhere to be seen. Leo didn't look up, lost in his own world. Alia's hand darted out. She didn't place the crane near him. She placed it directly on the step above his, right in his line of sight. And then, her job in that spot finished, she gathered her cleaning caddy and walked away, her back rigid, feeling his eyes on her. She didn't look back. She couldn't know that Leo stared at the paper crane for 10 full minutes, unmoving. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't been given a thing, a gift, a note, a toy, by anyone other than his father in years. He didn't know what it meant. Was it trash he was supposed to clean up? Was it a test? Finally, with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb, he picked it up. It was light. It was simple. He held it, his brow furrowed in confusion. The next day the crane was gone. Alia's heart sank. Had he thrown it away? Or worse, had Finch found it and destroyed it? She found Leo at the staircase again. This time she came prepared. She'd taken a bright blue sticky note from the kitchen supply room. She walked directly to the staircase. Leo saw her coming and tensed. He expected her to walk past, to ignore him, to give that wide, respectful arc the other staff always did. Alia stopped right in front of him. She held up the blue paper. He stared at it. She smiled, that same small, sad smile from the day before. Then, slowly she began to fold. Her hands moved deliberately. A fold, a crease, a tuck. She made the head. She pulled the wings. She didn't hide what she was doing. She was showing him. When she was finished, she offered the blue crane to him, her palm open. Leo looked at the crane. He looked at her face. His eyes were wide, a universe of questions in them. He pointed a small finger at the crane, then at his own chest. "For me?" He signed, his motion clumsy. Alia nodded. She pointed at the crane, then at her, then at him. "For you," she mouthed, her voice a whisper he couldn't hear but a word he could clearly read. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and took the small blue bird. He stared at it. Then he looked up at her face. It started at the corners of his mouth. A tiny twitch. It was a rusty, unpracticed movement, as if the muscles themselves had forgotten how. But it grew, spreading across his face until it was a real, breathtaking, silent smile. Alia's breath caught. It was the first time anyone in this house had probably seen him smile in years. It was the most beautiful, heartbreaking thing she had ever seen. "What?" A voice cut through the air, sharp as glass. "Is going on here?" Alia froze. The smile vanished from Leo's face, instantly extinguished. Mr. Finch stood at the base of the stairs, his face a mask of cold fury. His eyes weren't on Leo. They were locked on Alia. He had seen it all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My office. Now. Alia's stomach turned to ice. She gave one last panicked look at Leo, who clutched the blue crane to his chest, his face pale with fear. She followed Mr. Finch, the sound of his angry, measured footsteps echoing in the massive, silent hall. In the office, Finch didn't sit. He stood behind his immaculate desk, his hands clasped behind his back. Miss Alia. Perhaps I was unclear yesterday. Sir, I was just. You were fraternizing, he snapped. Your job description is to clean. You are not a nursemaid. You are not a friend. You are staff. Mr. Prescott pays for a frictionless, orderly environment. What you just did. That was friction. He's just a lonely little boy, Alia whispered, her own hands shaking. That, Finch said, his voice dropping, is not your concern. You are paid to clean, not to form attachments. You will stay away from the boy. You will not look at him, you will not interact with him, and you will certainly not give him things. This is your only warning. Are we clear? Mr. Finch is already trying to gatekeep basic human kindness. He's a bully in a suit, enforcing a system that's cruel and cold. Comment, kindness wins below if you're tired of people in authority trying to stop others from doing the right thing. Let us know you're not on Finch's side. Mr. Finch's warning had settled over Alia like a cold fog. For 2 days she had followed his orders to the letter. She took the wide, prescribed arc around the staircase. She kept her eyes glued to the marble floors. She could feel Leo watching her, his small form a statue of confusion on the bottom step. The betrayal in his gaze was almost worse than Finch's anger. On the 3rd day she couldn't do it anymore. She was cleaning the grand hall and he was there at his usual post. She was supposed to turn right toward the dining room. Instead, she walked straight, her cleaning caddy rattling softly. She walked right past the stairs, right past him. As she passed, she didn't stop, she didn't smile, but she made direct eye contact and gave one tiny, conspiratorial nod. I'm still here. A spark lit in his eyes. The next day he wasn't on the stairs. He was on the massive Persian rug in the center of the hall, just a few yards from where she was tasked with polishing the brass fixtures. He had brought his silver cars with him. He was testing the boundary. Alia's heart warmed. She said nothing. She just worked, the rhythmic shushu of her polishing cloth a soft, comforting sound in the quiet room. He began to play, his cars rolling silently over the intricate patterns of the rug. Then a small silver sports car rolled away from him, stopping right by her shoe. She paused her polishing. He was watching her, holding his breath. It was an offering. Alia smiled. She crouched down, tapped the tiny car with her finger, and then, with a gentle flick, sent it rolling perfectly back to him. His face lit up. This became their secret. It was a silent, forbidden friendship conducted in stolen glances and rolled toy cars, all under the looming, invisible threat of Mr. Finch. Over the next week, Leo's trust blossomed in this shared silence. He started to show her his toys. He would hold up a small red truck and she would nod and give him a thumbs up. He would demonstrate how a tiny door on a limousine opened, his small fingers meticulous. He was, she realized, a bright, funny boy trapped behind a wall of silence, and she was the first person in years to bother looking over it. This morning the sunlight was bright and Leo seemed almost happy. He had his entire collection, dozens of cars, arranged in a complex, sprawling city on the rug. Alia was working nearby and he kept looking up at her, wanting her to see his creation. She smiled and signed good job. He beamed, his chest puffing out with pride. He picked up his favorite car, a sleek black model, to show her. He scrambled to his feet to bring it over. And then it happened. His smile didn't just fade, it was stolen. His face twisted in an instant, a sharp, sudden mask of pain. He dropped the car. The sound of the small metal toy clattering on the hardwood floor just beyond the rug was a gunshot in the silent mansion. It was loud, shocking, and violent. Alia froze. Leo froze. They both looked instinctively down the hall toward Mr. Finch's office. Nothing. No footsteps. But Leo wasn't worried about the noise. His hands, both of them, flew to the right side of his head. He squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body tensing, his knees buckling. A small, choked, animalistic whimper tore from his throat. Finch's rules evaporated. In a second, Alia was on her knees in front of him. "Leo? What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice useless. She switched to the simple signs she'd practiced late at night in her room. "Her? Where?" His face was ghostly pale. He was digging his knuckles into his right ear, rocking back and forth, his teeth gritted. He shook his head frantically as if trying to dislodge the pain. "Your ear?" she mouthed, her heart starting to hammer. She gently, so gently, pulled his hands away from his head. He let her, his eyes screwed shut, trusting her even in his agony. She looked at his ear. It was red, the skin irritated. Alia's blood ran cold. Darius. This is how it started with Darius. A fever. An earache. The doctor who said, "It's just fluid, he'll be fine." The memory was so clear, so painful, it was like a ghost pressing its cold hands on her shoulders. "Not again. Please God, not again." "Let me see, Leo," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Let me just look." She tilted his head, angling his ear toward the bright, cold shaft of sunlight from the towering window. He was trembling. She gently pulled back the shell of his ear. She peered into the small, narrow canal. At first, nothing. Just shadow. She leaned closer, her breath held. She told herself it was just wax. Just an infection. And then, she saw it. It wasn't wax. It wasn't a shadow. Deep inside, nestled against the pearly surface of what must have been his eardrum, was a thing. It was small, no bigger than a grain of rice. It was black and glistening like a drop of wet ink. Alia blinked, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It had to be a trick of the light. She held her own breath to stop shaking, and as she stared, the glistening black thing pulsated. Moved. It shifted, recoiling from the light. It was alive. Alia flew backward, stifling a scream behind her hand. Her stomach heaved. Leo, who had been watching her face, saw the look of pure, unadulterated horror. His pain was instantly eclipsed by a new, sharper terror. He knew. He knew she had seen it. Alia's mind was a siren. Warren. Finch. Hospital. 9/11. She had to tell someone. She had to get him help. She tried to calm her frantic, shaking hands. She looked him in the eyes, forcing a calm she did not feel. She signed the one single logical word. Doctor. The reaction was instantaneous. It was violent. Leo screamed, a raw, voiceless sound, and scrambled backward on the rug, pushing himself away from her as if she had just set him on fire. No. He signed it again and again, his hands a frantic, uncoordinated blur. No, no, no. It's okay, Leo. Alia whispered, holding her hands up, palms out. They'll help you. I promise they'll make it better. Tears, hot and terrified, finally streamed down his pale cheeks. He shook his head, his whole body trembling. He signed, his motions sloppy with panic, his face a portrait of absolute, soul-deep dread. Doctors. Hurt. Me. He signed it again, jabbing the air. Always. Hurt. Me. No. Please. Alia. No. She stopped. He wasn't being stubborn. He wasn't being a child. He was genuinely, mortally terrified. He had been poked, prodded, and pained by helpers his entire life, and nothing had ever gotten better. He was pleading with her, the only person in the world he trusted, not to betray him to his tormentors. Alia was trapped. The secret was now hers. A little boy was in agony with a living thing in his head, and the only person with the power to help was the one person he feared most in the world. Leo's frantic, signed plea still hung in the air. No. Doctors. Hurt. Me. Alia's heart was a trapped bird in her chest. The image of that thing, that dark, glistening, living thing, was burned into her vision. She felt sick. Her first instinct was to run, to grab the phone, to scream for help. But Leo's terror was a physical force, holding her in place. He had scrambled away from her, and now he was watching her, his eyes wide, not just with pain, but with the new fear that she would betray him. She had to make a choice. Right now. Okay, she whispered, her voice shaking. She held up her hands, palms open. Okay, Leo. I promise. No doctors. It was a lie. She couldn't promise that. But it was the only thing that would calm him. His frantic breathing slowed just a fraction. He still held his ear, his face pale, but the blind panic in his eyes subsided, replaced by a desperate, pleading trust. It's okay, she mouthed, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. He was in agony. She could see a fresh wave of it hit him as he winced, his small body tensing. What do I do? Her mind was racing. I can't leave him. I can't call anyone. And I can't just ignore what I saw. She had to be wrong. She had to be. It was the sunlight, a strange shadow, a piece of something. She had to look again. She had to be sure before she did anything. Here, she signed, pointing to the warm rectangle of sunlight on the floor, away from the shadows of the grand staircase. Let's sit. Just sit. He hesitated, then nodded. He was a small, wounded animal, and she was the only one he'd let near. He scooted across the carpet and into the sunlit patch. Alia sat on her knees in front of him. Better? She signed. He shook his head. His eyes were filling with tears again, not of terror this time, but of pure, exhausting pain. She couldn't stand it. Her hand twitched. She remembered Mr. Finch's ice-cold warning. You will stay away from the boy. She remembered her promise to Darius. The two forces were at war inside her. Darius won. She reached out, her hand hovering, and gently, so gently, put her hand on his shoulder. A simple human touch. He instantly leaned into it, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that broke her heart. Leo, she whispered, her voice thick. I have to look one more time. I won't touch. I promise. He was scared, but he nodded. He trusted her. She knelt in front of him, her body blocking him from the view of the main hall. She tilted his head just as she had before. She shaded her eyes, leaning in, her own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Please be a shadow. Please be wax. Please. What are you doing? The voice was a physical explosion. It wasn't just a shout, it was a roar, a shockwave of pure, unadulterated rage that vibrated through the marble floor. Alia sprang back as if she'd been struck by lightning. She fell backward onto the floor, her cleaning supplies scattering with a clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. Warren Prescott stood in the archway of the hall, his face a mask of thunder. He was in a pristine, dark suit, his phone still clenched in his hand, his eyes blazing. Leo flinched so violently he whimpered, clapping his hands over his ears, a useless, tragic reflex that only made him press down on the source of his agony. Mr. Prescott. Alia scrambled to her feet, her whole body trembling. Sir, I asked you a question. Warren strode toward her, his footsteps like hammer blows. He didn't even glance at his son, who was now a small, cowering ball on the floor. His fury was focused entirely on her. What were you doing, my son? Nothing. Alia's voice was high and thin with panic. I swear, sir, nothing. He was in pain. He screamed, he dropped his car. He's hurting. He has bad days. Warren bit off the words as if they tasted foul. No, sir, it's not that. The words tumbled out, desperate, unstoppable. She had to make him see. It's his ear. He was grabbing his ear. I looked and I think something is in it. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the shout. Warren stopped just 2 feet from her. His face, which had been red with anger, went pale. His voice dropped to a lethally soft, cold hiss. Something in his ear. Yes, sir. I saw it. It was dark and it... You saw it? He whispered, and the contempt in that whisper made her recoil. You, a maid, diagnosed him? He took a slow step closer. Alia took an involuntary step back. You are not a doctor, he spat, his voice low and vibrating with a rage that was bone deep. You are not an audiologist. You are not a specialist from Zurich or Berlin or any of the other dozen facilities I have flown him to. He raised his voice, the volume building with every word, his control shredding. I pay millions, do you have any concept of that? Millions of dollars a year, to have the best medical experts in the world examine my son. They have scanned him, tested him, and treated him. And you think you found something in 5 minutes with your eyes? But sir, I saw it. What if they're wrong? What if? They are not wrong, he thundered. You saw nothing. You saw a shadow. You saw wax. You saw what your uneducated, unqualified, interfering mind wanted to see. He was shaking now, his face pale, his composure utterly shattered. This was about more than his son. It was about his failure. It was about the one thing his money couldn't fix, and the sheer, unmitigated audacity of a new maid suggesting she had the answer. He pointed a rigid, trembling finger at her face. You will not touch him. You will not speak to him. You will not look at him. If he is in distress, you will call Mr. Finch. If he is on fire, you will call Mr. Finch. Your staff. You are here to clean. You are to never go near my son again. His chest was heaving. Am I clear? Alia was frozen, paralyzed. Tears of terror and pure, white-hot injustice burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, a single jerky, terrified motion. Yes, sir, she choked out, her voice barely audible. Warren stared at her for one more long, hateful second. He straightened his suit jacket with a sharp, angry tug. He then turned to his son. His face didn't soften, but the rage subsided, replaced by a cold, weary frustration. He didn't sign. Leo, go to your room. Now. Leo, who had watched the entire exchange with wide, terrified eyes, scrambled to his feet. He was still clutching his ear. He gave Alia one last, desperate look, and then he ran, his footsteps vanishing up the grand staircase. Warren turned and stormed out of the hall, pulling his phone back to his ear. I don't care about the board, he barked into it. Liquidate it. Alia was left alone in the vast, perfect, silent hall, her knees shaking so badly she had to grab the wall to stay standing. The secret was still hers. But now it was a bomb and the fuse was lit. For the rest of the day, Alia was an automaton. She scrubbed, she polished, she dusted, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind replayed the scene in the hallway on a loop. Warren's face, contorted with a rage so deep it was almost like grief. Am I clear? The sound of Leo's small running footsteps. And the image burned behind her eyelids, of that dark, pulsating thing. She wasn't just a maid who had been reprimanded. She was a witness who had been silenced. Every time she bent over to wipe a skirting board, the cold, gleaming marble blurred, and she wasn't in the Prescott estate anymore. She was on the cracked linoleum floor of the county clinic 10 years ago. She saw her brother Darius in his final week. He had stopped trying to sign, frustrated that no one understood. He would just sit by their apartment window, his small hand pressed hard against the side of his head. The same ear. The exact same gesture. He would rock back and forth just as Leo had, his eyes squeezed shut. The doctors, with their tired faces and student loans, had called it a complication of the original infection. They'd given him useless pink medicine that he couldn't keep down. Alia, just a kid herself, had watched, paralyzed and helpless, as the light in his eyes dimmed. She had looked away. She had been a child, powerless, with no money and no voice, but in her heart she knew she had just watched him suffer. She'd watched him slip away in a silence she couldn't break. Now she was scrubbing a floor for a man who had all the money, all the power, and all the experts in the world. And that man was making the exact same mistake. Dear viewers, Warren Prescott had all the power, all the money, and all the experts. And what did it get him? A son in agony and a decade of lies. He was so blinded by their fancy titles and expensive degrees that he threatened the only person who actually saw the truth. He's worshipping a failed system, and his son is paying the price. Warren trusts experts who have failed for 10 years, but threatens the one person who actually sees his son's pain. Smash that subscribe button if you believe we should listen to those who actually care, not just those with a fancy title. People who worship experts over results won't subscribe. Let us know you're on the side of common sense. Night fell on the estate like a velvet shroud, heavier and more complete than the sterile quiet of the day. Alia had finished her duties an hour ago. She was in her small, plain room in the staff quarters, still in her uniform, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed. She hadn't eaten. She couldn't sleep. Her mind was a battlefield. Warren's threat, you will not touch him. Darius's face, why didn't you help me? This was her job. Her only job. The money that kept her mother in her small apartment, the money that was slowly chipping away at the mountain of medical debt. To lose this job wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe. Warren wouldn't just fire her. He would have her arrested. The word assault would be on the report. She would be unemployable. She stood, her body rigid with indecision. She was just a maid. What right did she have to overrule a father, a billionaire, a team of world-renowned specialists? She was probably wrong. It was a shadow. It was wax. It was her own trauma painting pictures that weren't there. She decided to get a glass of water. Anything to move, to break the paralysis. She stepped out of her room into the long, dark service hallway. The house was dead. The only sound was the faint hum of the security system. And then she heard it. It was almost imperceptible. A sound so quiet she thought she'd imagined it. She held her breath. She took a few steps down the hall toward the main staircase. Thud. It was a whimper. A low, muffled, agonizing sound. It was coming from the west wing. From Leo's room. It was the sound of a child trying to cry without making noise, followed by the soft, dull thud of a small body hitting a headboard. He was in pain. Right now. He was alone in the dark and he was in agony. She knew the house. She knew the routines. At this hour, Mr. Finch was in his own cottage on the far side of the grounds. And Warren Prescott, like clockwork, was in his study. The study was in the east wing, 3 floors up, a fortress of soundproof glass and steel where he managed his global empire. He was a world away. No one would know. She moved. Her feet, clad in their soft-soled uniform shoes, made no sound on the endless marble. She was a shadow moving through a tomb. She reached his door. The whimper was clearer now, punctuated by a small, frustrated gasp. Her hand rested on the heavy, cold brass doorknob. This was the line. Everything she was working for, everything she was fighting to protect. Her job, her mother's security, her freedom, was on this side of the door. On the other side was a little boy who reminded her of her brother. Warren's voice was a venomous echo in her head. You will not touch him. Her hand was trembling so hard she couldn't turn the knob. This is insane. I'm a maid. I'm not a doctor. I could hurt him. I could make it worse. I could go to jail. The whimper came again, sharper this time. Thud. In that sound she didn't just hear Leo. She heard Darius. She heard the final rattling silence of the county clinic. She heard the promise she had whispered at her brother's graveside. I can't look away, she whispered, her voice a tiny, fierce thread in the darkness. I will not look away again. Her hand, which had been trembling with fear, suddenly became rock steady. The decision was made. She didn't have a plan. She just had a promise. She needed something. Her hand went to the collar of her uniform, to the small silver pin that held her name tag in place. It was 2 inches long, thin but strong. It wasn't a medical instrument. It was the only thing she had. She unclipped it, its small weight heavy and real in her palm. Alia took one deep, steadying breath, turned the heavy, silent knob, and pushed the door open, slipping like a ghost into the darkness of the room. Alia slipped into the room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The door latch clicked shut behind her with a dreadful, metallic finality. Thud. The sound was coming from the bed. He was curled in a tight, fetal ball, his face buried in his pillow, his small body rigid with pain. He was trying to cry, but years of silence had taught him how to do it without making a sound, a series of shuddering, internal gasps. Leo, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He flinched, his head whipping around. His eyes were wide and white in the darkness, glistening with tears, panicked at being discovered. It's me. It's Alia. She moved slowly, her hands up as if approaching a frightened animal. She knelt beside his bed. The small silver pin was clutched in her right hand. He saw it. His eyes darted from her face to the glinting metal, and a new wave of fear washed over him. I know it hurts, she whispered, her voice shaking. I know. She held up the pin. Leo, I saw something. I think I can help. I have to help. But you have to trust me. I will be gentle. I promise. His eyes searched hers. This was an impossible choice. He was trapped between the familiar, agonizing pain in his head and the new, sharp terror of the unknown. He was terrified of what she might do. But as another throb of pain made him wince, he looked at her face, the only kind face in this entire cold house. After a long, agonizing moment that stretched for an eternity, he let out a shuddering breath. He closed his eyes and gave a single jerky nod. Yes. Alia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely function. Light. I need light. She reached over and clicked on the small, dim blue shark-shaped night light on his bedside table. It cast a weak, ghoulish glow. Okay, she breathed. Okay. Hold still. Hold so still for me, Leo. She knelt on the floor, her left hand coming up to gently, tenderly cup his head. He was trembling. She was trembling. Her right hand holding the pin advanced. The pin's shadow touched his ear first. She tilted his head, her own breath trapped in her lungs, her heart pounding a frantic thump 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 that felt loud enough to wake the house. Please God. Please guide me. She angled the pin using the dull light to find the canal. Please be wax. Please be nothing. And there it was. Glistening. Pulsating. Her stomach heaved. It was real. She moved the pin closer. Her hand was shaking so violently. She steadied her wrist against his pillow. Don't move, Leo. She nudged the thing with the tip. It wasn't hard. It was soft, yielding, sticky. She repressed a gag. This was it. The point of no return. She angled the sharp tip, not to poke but to hook. She slid it beneath the object's soft underbelly. She felt it catch. Please don't hurt him. Please. She pulled. Her hand moved with agonizing slowness, drawing the pin back. She felt a sickening, sliding resistance. And then it came free. It tumbled out of his ear, a grotesque, dark, wet thing trailing a tiny thread of mucus. It fell directly into her open, trembling left palm. It was black, round like a grotesque, living seed, and it pulsated once with a weak, residual life before curling in on itself. Alia stared, her mind blank with horror. Leo's eyes, which had been squeezed shut, flew open. He gasped, a huge, shuddering intake of air. The room was suddenly, profoundly dead silent. Not the mansion's enforced silence. This was a true, ringing, absolute vacuum of sound. And into that vacuum, tick-tock, Alia froze. Tick-tock, tick-tock. From the grand hall, 2 floors below, the massive grandfather clock. Alia had worked beside it for 2 weeks and had never once heard it. Now it was as loud as a hammer. Leo gasped again, a sharp, panicked sound. His hands flew up, not to his one ear in pain, but over both ears. He cowered, his whole body shaking, shrinking away from the noise. The tick-tock was alien, sharp, terrifying. He looked around the room, his eyes wild with a new, strange shock. He looked at Alia. She was frozen, staring at him, tears of awe and terror beginning to stream down her face. His mouth opened. He tried to form a word he had only ever seen on her lips. A rough, hoarse, broken sound came out. Oh, I. The word hung in the air, a fragile, impossible, miraculous thing. Slam. The bedroom door flew open, crashing against the wall. The overhead lights flooded the room, bright as a searchlight, blinding them. Mr. Finch stood in the doorway, his face a mask of absolute, pale horror. He must have heard the gasp, the word, the sound. His eyes darted from Alia, kneeling by the bed, a pin in one hand, to the glistening black thing in her other, to the cowering, terrified boy on the bed. He didn't see a miracle. He saw an assault. Mr. Prescott. Finch bellowed, his voice a terrified roar that echoed through the silent house. Mr. Prescott. Quickly. Intruder. She's hurting him. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Warren Prescott burst into the room, his face a storm of adrenaline and panic. Get away from him, he roared. He saw the scene in one single damning snapshot. Alia, the sharp pin, the dark object in her hand. And his son, pale, shaking, and covering his ears as if in agony. What did you do? Warren screamed. Before Alia could find her voice, Leo lowered his hands, his face a mask of confusion and terror, and looked at his father. His voice was a weak, scratchy whisper. Dad. Warren froze. For 1/10 of a second, his brain processed the sound. He heard it. He knew he heard it. But it was impossible. It couldn't be. The scene before him, the maid, the pin, the thing, offered a different, more logical, more horrifying explanation. His shock instantly curdled into a righteous, protective, ice-cold fury. He pointed a shaking finger at Alia. What did you do to him? His voice was low, deadly. What did you put in his ear? No. Alia cried, scrambling to her feet, holding her hand out. Sir, no. I didn't put it in. I took it out. He can hear. You're insane. Warren shouted, grabbing the phone from the bedside table. You assaulted my son. You came in here, you. He couldn't even form the words. He dialed security. Get up here. West Wing. Call the police. She's attacked my son. No. Leo screamed. It was the loudest sound he had ever made, sharp and real and full of new raw vocal power. No. Dad. She helped. She helped me. But Warren didn't hear the words. He just heard the scream. He saw his son's terror at the sound, at the shouting, and aimed all his rage at Alia. Get her. Two household security guards in black suits burst in, grabbing Alia's arms in a painful vice-like grip. Sir, please? Alia screamed, tears of terror and frustration finally breaking free. Listen to him. He's talking. Please, he can hear. Get her out. Warren roared. They dragged her from the room. As she struggled, her hand was forced open. The small, dark, pulsating thing was knocked from her grasp. It fell to the pristine white carpet, where it lay, a single damning and grotesque piece of evidence. Alia was dragged down the hallway, her last glimpse of the room being Warren grabbing his terrified, crying and speaking son, shouting, "It's okay, Leo, I've got you, she can't hurt you anymore." The world had shrunk to a concrete box. The clang of the cell door shutting was the sound of a life ending. Alia sat on the narrow, stone-cold bench, her hands cuffed in front of her. The adrenaline had vanished, leaving a hollow, paralyzing cold. She was no longer a maid. She was a line item on a police report. Assault. Breaking and entering. Practicing medicine without a license. The charges the guards had spat at her echoed in the sterile silence. It was over. Her job was gone. Her mother's apartment was gone. Her future was a black hole of consequences. Warren Prescott's word against hers. A billionaire against a nobody. And the evidence. My God, the evidence. A terrified child, a sharp pin, and a grotesque thing. Who would ever believe her? She put her head in her cuffed hands, the metal pressing painfully against her forehead. The memory of Leo's voice, that impossible, scratchy, miraculous word, Dad, felt like a cruel hallucination. It was the last bitter joke of a night that had destroyed her. She was a hero for 10 seconds and now she was a criminal. She began to shake, not from the cold, but from the sheer, crushing finality of it all. While Alia's world had stopped, Warren's was moving at 100 miles an hour. The Prescott estate was a frantic swirl of flashing red and blue lights. Mr. Finch, his face a sheet of white, had collected the dark object from the carpet with a pair of tweezers, his hand shaking, and placed it in a sterile glass vial. Now, in the back of the private ambulance, Warren sat, rigid as steel, his face a mask of cold, contained fury. He was on the phone barking orders. I want the chief of pediatrics. I want Dr. Croft. I want the entire wing cleared and I want a lab team standing by. Now. Leo was strapped to a gurney beside him. But he wasn't crying. He wasn't in pain. He was absorbing. His eyes were wide, darting from the flashing lights on the wet pavement outside to the paramedic's face, to the crackle of the radio. The siren. The rumble of the engine. The sharp snap of his father's voice. These were not just new sounds, they were a physical assault. He was a man born in a vacuum, suddenly dropped into the middle of a rock concert. He was shell-shocked, his hands clamped tight over his ears, his body trembling, not from the pain in his ear, but from the pain of everything else. They burst through the private entrance of the Prescott Children's Wing, a wing Warren had personally funded. A phalanx of white coats was waiting, led by a tall, silver-haired man. Warren, the man said, his voice hushed and serious. Dr. Croft. What happened? This made this psychopath, Warren bit out, his voice a low growl. She got to him. Did something. She stuck a pin in his ear. She claimed. I don't know what she claimed. He thrust the small glass vial, which Finch had given him, into the doctor's hand. This is what she said she took out. Dr. Croft looked at the dark, curled object in the vial, his face a mask of clinical disgust. Find out what she did to him, Warren ordered, his voice breaking with a rage he could barely control. Find out what drug she used, what she put in him. I want her prosecuted. I want her in jail for the rest of her life. Warren paced the hall outside a glass-walled audiology booth. Inside, a kind-faced female specialist was placing small sensors on Leo's head. Leo was small and terrified, flinching at every new sound. Dr. Croft stood beside Warren, his arms crossed. The lab is running a full toxicology and biopsy on the specimen. We'll know something in an hour. An hour? Warren snapped. Find out now. Inside the booth, the audiologist smiled at Leo and began the tests. She played a soft tone. She watched her monitor. She frowned. She adjusted her equipment and played it again louder. Warren watched her through the glass. What? What's that look? The audiologist held up a finger, then spoke into her mic. Leo? Can you hear me? Leo, who could now read lips and hear the sound, nodded, his eyes wide. Okay, sweetie. I'm going to play a sound. I want you to raise your hand if you hear it in this ear. She motioned to his left ear. She played a tone so soft, Warren himself couldn't hear it. Leo's hand shot up. The audiologist's jaw went slack. She tried the right ear, the ear Alia had touched. The tone. Leo's hand shot up. She ran a full-spectrum sweep, her fingers flying across the console, her expression shifting from confusion to complete, stunning, professional shock. She stepped out of the booth, her clipboard clattering against the doorframe. Dr. Croft. Mr. Prescott. Her voice was a stunned whisper. Is he damaged? Warren demanded. Did she puncture the eardrum? No, sir. The audiologist was pale. The eardrum it's inflamed. Irritated. But it is perfectly 100% intact. Then what? What's wrong? Nothing, the audiologist said, her voice full of awe. Mr. Prescott, I've run the full test battery 3 times. I don't know how to explain this. I don't know what that woman did. But your son, he has perfect auditory response. Complete bilateral hearing. He's not deaf. He's not even hard of hearing. He can hear everything. The hallway was silent. Warren stared at her. That's impossible. That's a lie. He is congenitally deaf. He has nerve atrophy. Run it again. Sir, I don't need to. He's responding to tones at 10 decibels. He's in sensory overload. He doesn't know how to process sound. He's been deaf his whole life and now, suddenly, he isn't. Just as Warren was about to explode at her, Dr. Croft's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his eyes scanning the lab report that had just come through. His face, which had been serious, turned the color of ash. Warren, Croft whispered, his professional calm shattered. What? Warren snarled, turning on him. The lab. The object. He was staring at his phone, his hand shaking. It wasn't a drug. She wasn't lying. She did take it out. What was it? Dr. Croft looked up, his eyes wide with a terrible, dawning horror. It's biological. A parasitic chrysalis. Acanthocephalodormians. My God. It's textbook. Incredibly rare, almost unheard of. It must have gotten in when he was an infant. It lodges in the canal, goes dormant. It feeds on nothing. It just hides. Get to the point, Croft. It secretes a fluid. Croft said, his voice rising. A potent, highly localized neuroinhibitor. It coats the auditory nerve endings, deadening them completely. It's a perfect biological anesthetic. It blocks all sound. He looked at Warren, his face a mask of sickening realization. Warren, the moment it's removed, the fluid dissipates almost instantly. The nerve connection is restored. It's harmless if it's removed. A dead, cold, ringing silence filled the hall, heavier than any in the Prescott mansion. Warren's voice was a whisper. He was never deaf? He was just blocked. It appears so, Croft stammered. And this thing, Warren's voice was lethally soft. It's detectable? Well, yes, Croft said, sweating now. A high-resolution MRI or a deep canal fiber optic scan would have shown the mass, of course. It's not invisible. But Warren's face, which had been pale, turned a dark, terrifying red. The explosion was not a shout. It was a low, seismic eruption. But what, doctor? We weren't looking for it. You weren't looking? Warren roared, the sound echoing off the sterile walls, making Leo jump inside the booth. I have had him scanned. I have had him tested. I have had him treated by your best people in this hospital for 10 years. How did every single one of you miss this? Dr. Croft recoiled, his professional authority vanishing, replaced by the naked fear of a man whose career was about to be annihilated. Sir, please, he stammered, holding up his hands. His condition. It was diagnosed as congenital deafness at birth. By the best. All our treatment, all our research, it was based on that diagnosis. We were treating a genetic nerve cell atrophy, not a bug. Warren froze. The rage vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying cold. His mind latched onto the words. Diagnosed at birth. Congenital. Who, Warren said, his voice a razor, made that diagnosis? Warren Prescott stepped out of the black town car and into the rain-soaked darkness of his own home. He didn't feel the cold. The rage that had stormed through him at the hospital, the chaotic, blind fury of a betrayed man, had burned itself out. What was left was something colder, heavier, and infinitely more dangerous. It was purpose. The hot, grieving, and helpless father was gone. In his place was the man who built an empire. The man who liquidated companies, who shattered boards, who understood that the only way to cure a disease was to cut out every last infected cell. He didn't go to the police station to release Alia. Not yet. Justice had to be methodical. The infection had to be purged from the root. He entered the grand hall. The lights were blazing, a harsh, artificial glare in the pre-dawn blackness. The air smelled of industrial cleaner. Mr. Finch was there, standing over a small team of housekeepers who were on their hands and knees, scrubbing the section of Persian rug where Leo had collapsed, where Alia had knelt. Finch was erasing the evidence. He was restoring the cold, sterile order. He turned, hearing the heavy doors. His face, which had been tight with managerial focus, snapped into a mask of practiced, somber concern. He glided forward, his hands clasped. "Sir, you've returned." He glanced at the cleaning crew. "I've taken the liberty of handling the contamination. A terrible, terrible incident. I've already spoken with our attorneys about—" "Is Master Leo all right?" he finally asked, the picture of loyal concern. "Did that woman damage him permanently?" Warren didn't answer. He just stood there, letting the rain from his coat drip onto the priceless, gleaming floor. He held up a single sheet of paper. The blood drained from Mr. Finch's face. It didn't just go pale, it went a waxy, sickly gray. The mask of the loyal, efficient butler didn't just slip. It shattered, revealing the terrified, cornered, greedy little man beneath. I. He stammered, his eyes darting to the housekeepers, who were now frozen, staring. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. I was only trying to protect you. To protect the estate. From false hope. These specialists, they promised the world I was just managing your affairs. You sold my son's hearing." Warren's voice was still a whisper. The housekeepers recoiled. Finch looked as if he'd been physically struck. "You sold 10 years of his life," Warren continued, his voice devoid of all passion, a flat, cold instrument of judgment. "You sold it for a percentage. For a consulting fee on a research wing that would never find a cure. For a paycheck." He took one slow step forward. Finch took one stumbling step back. "You stood here in my house every day. You watched him. You watched me. And you lied." "No." Finch's voice was a high, pathetic squeak. "Sir, you don't understand. It was Dr. Croft. It was his idea. I just filed the reports. Please, Mr. Prescott." Warren. The name was a desperate, inappropriate plea, a last-ditch attempt at a connection that had never existed. Warren just stared at him. "You were the gatekeeper. And you let the wolves in." As if summoned by the words, the massive, oak front doors opened again. 2 uniformed police officers, their jackets dark with rain, stepped inside. Finch's legs buckled. He looked from the police to Warren, his face a mask of pure, pleading terror. Warren didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He just looked at the senior officer and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "That's him. Arrest him." "Sir. No. Please. I have a family. I was loyal." Finch cried as the officers grabbed his arms and pulled them behind his back with a professional, brutal efficiency. Warren Prescott turned his back on the man who had been his shadow for 15 years. He watched the rain on the window as Mr. Finch was read his rights and dragged, whimpering, out of the house. An hour later, Warren was back at the hospital. He didn't use the private entrance this time. He walked through the main lobby, his wet shoes squeaking on the polished floors, flanked by the same 2 officers. He walked straight past the nurse's station, straight to the administrative wing, to the plush corner office of Dr. Alan Croft. Croft was there. He hadn't left. He was sitting at his massive desk, his expensive suit rumpled, his silver hair a mess. A half-full glass of whiskey sat near his keyboard. He'd been waiting for the axe to fall. When he saw Warren enter, followed by the police, He stood up so fast his heavy leather chair toppled over backward with a crash. "Warren," he blurted, his voice high and reedy. "Warren, thank God. I've been reviewing everything. It's a terrible, terrible oversight. A 1 in a billion, a diagnostic error. We are prepared to offer a significant." Warren didn't speak. He just walked to the desk, his eyes locking with Croft's. He tossed the original 8-year-old MRI scan film onto the desk blotter. It landed with a wet, flapping sound. "You called it an artifact." Croft stared at the film as if it were a cobra. It looked like an artifact. A shadow. A machine blur. The diagnosis was already congenital. "A diagnosis you made," Warren finished for him, his voice like ice. "A diagnosis you protected. A diagnosis that, conveniently, required millions in experimental research grants. Funding for an entire wing. Your wing." That's a lie." Croft stammered, but the sweat was beading on his forehead. "The research is valid. We were helping people." "Were you helping?" Warren interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "When your own technician flagged this artifact, and you buried the note? Was it valid when Finch steered me away from the Swiss clinic that was pioneering work in auditory parasites? You didn't make an error, doctor. You made a choice. You built your career on my son's silence. And you let an innocent woman go to jail to protect it." Warren looked at the officers. "He's the one who signed the reports. He's the one who buried the evidence." As the officers moved forward, Croft collapsed into his toppled chair, a broken, terrified old man. I'm ruined," he whispered, looking at the floor. Warren Prescott looked at him, his face devoid of any emotion at all. "You were ruined the moment you signed that report." He turned and walked out of the office, not looking back. Dear viewers, Warren is finally cleaning house. The rot wasn't just in his son's ear. It was in his staff, in his hospital, in the entire system he trusted. He's taking them all down one by one. If you're glad to see Dr. Croft and Mr. Finch get what they deserve, hit that like button. Let's show that we stand against the corruption and greed that preys on the innocent. The click and heavy buzz of the electronic lock on the cell door snapped Alia out of a cold, fitful sleep. She jerked awake, her heart leaping into her throat. She was still on the concrete bench, her body stiff and frozen, her face streaked with the salt of dried tears. This was it. Transfer to county jail. The end of her life. The cell door swung open with a heavy, metallic groan. A police officer stood there, his face impassive. "Ma'am, you're free to go." Alia didn't move. She couldn't process the words. It had to be a trick. A cruel joke. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the hallway behind the officer. It was Warren Prescott. He looked like a man who had been through a war. His $1,000 suit was rumpled, his tie was gone, and his eyes were bloodshot, hollowed out by a guilt so profound it was a physical presence. He wasn't the titan of industry who had roared at her. He was just a man looking utterly and completely broken. He stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the small, dead room. Alia flinched, instinctively pressing herself back against the concrete wall. "Alia," he said. His voice was a dry, broken rasp. She just stared, her eyes wide, her whole body trembling. He had to stop, his throat working. He looked down at his own expensive, shaking hands, then back up at her. "I am so sorry." The words were thick, torn from him. "There are no words. There are no excuses. I did this." She watched him, her mind unable to bridge the gap between this man and the one who had her arrested. "Everything you said," he continued, his voice cracking. "Every part of it, you were right. You were right, and I was a blind, arrogant fool." He took a step closer, not as a threat, but as a plea. "You were the only one who was right. You were the only one who wasn't looking at the charts or the money. You were the only one who looked at him." He gestured to the open door, a man defeated. "Please. I've sent for your things. The charges have been dropped. A car is waiting. I can't undo what I did, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to fix it." Warren Prescott stood at a podium. He was clean-shaven in a sharp suit, but the haunted, humbled look remained in his eyes. He didn't read from a script. "For 10 years, he said, his voice amplified by the microphones, clear and steady, "my son Leo was a prisoner of a silence manufactured by greed. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the press corps. He was not born deaf. His hearing was stolen from him by a parasitic organism, and that theft was covered up year after year by the very experts I paid millions to trust. He didn't spare himself. I was a willing participant, blinded by my own faith in a corrupt, for-profit system. I failed my son. But I will not fail him again. He detailed it all. The buried scans. Dr. Croft's fraudulent research. Mr. Finch's role as a gatekeeper. The reporters were in a frenzy. This system is broken, Warren said, his voice gaining a new, cold power. And I will spend the rest of my fortune tearing it down and building something better. He signaled for an aide, who unveiled a large banner behind him. Today I am launching a new foundation. It will be called the Darius Project. In the back of the room, standing quietly by the door, Alia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears. It is named for Darius, Warren continued, his eyes finding hers across the sea of cameras. A boy who was also failed by this same system, a boy who died in silence. This foundation will provide free, transparent, and compassionate audiological and medical care for any child who needs it, regardless of their family's ability to pay. A reporter shouted, "Who will run this foundation, Mr. Prescott? Who can you possibly trust?" Warren looked at Alia. A small, real smile touched his lips. "The only person I know who has proven she'll put a child's well-being above everything else. The only person who showed me how to listen. Its new director, Miss Alia." All cameras, all lights, all eyes turned to her. She stood there, trembling, but this time her head was held high. The first thing you noticed was the sound. Music, a light indie folk song, was drifting from the open French doors of the grand hall. The second thing was the laughter. A bright, clear, loud kid's laugh. The estate was no longer a sterile museum. The lawns were still green, but in the middle of the main garden, there was a makeshift baseball diamond. Warren Prescott sat on the porch, not in his high-tower study. He was in a polo shirt, not a suit. A file on his lap read, "The Darius Project, Q3 report," but he wasn't looking at it. He was watching the lawn. "Okay, Alia. Throw it. Throw the fastball." Leo, now 11, vibrant and overflowing with life, stood in a batter's stance, his baseball cap on backward. Alia, in jeans and a t-shirt, stood on the mound, laughing. "You're not ready for my fastball, kid. You're gonna fall over." "Just throw it," he yelled, his voice full of a boy's bright, boundless energy. She wound up and threw a gentle pitch. Leo swung with all his might. The crack of the bat was as sharp and sweet as a birdsong. The ball sailed over the hedge. "Yes!" Leo shouted, pumping his fist and rounding the imaginary bases, his feet thundering on the grass. "Home run!" Alia laughed, catching her breath, and walked over to the porch, taking a sip of lemonade. She stood beside Warren, and they watched Leo do a victory dance on home plate. It was a comfortable, shared silence. "He's loud," Warren said, a small smile playing on his lips. The word was a prayer. "He's making up for lost time," Alia replied softly. Warren was quiet for a long moment. He closed the file on his lap. He looked at Alia, his eyes clear of all the old, cold ghosts, filled only with a gratitude so deep it was bottomless. "Thank you, Alia," he said, his voice thick. She smiled. "For what? He's a great kid. He's a natural athlete." "No," Warren said, his gaze shifting back to his son, who was now trying to teach a squirrel to play fetch. "You didn't just give my son his hearing back." He turned and his eyes met hers. "You gave me mine." Dear viewers, Alia and Warren are changing the world, turning a terrible wrong into a force for good, all because one person refused to look away. If this story inspired you and you believe that good must win, then hit that subscribe button for more stories just like this. Don't let the corrupt, greedy systems of the world have the last word. Let us know you're on the side of hope.